While I lay unconscious after emergency surgery, my husband Jeff emptied every account we shared, $240,000 gone in 3 days. Blanche won't survive the week anyway, he whispered to his mistress, as they planned their European getaway. But when I woke up and saw those bank statements, I smiled, because Jeff had no idea about the $2.8 million cryptocurrency portfolio I'd been building in secret for 8 years. The steady beep of the heart monitor was the first sound that penetrated the fog in my mind. Fluorescent lights stabbed through my eyelids like needles, and my throat felt like I'd swallowed broken glass. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But it wasn't the physical pain that made my blood run cold. It was the conversation floating through the partially open door to my hospital room. The life insurance alone will set us up for years, Samantha. Jeff's voice carried that smug tone I'd learned to recognize over our 12-year marriage. Plus, I've already moved everything from the joint accounts. She always left the finances to me anyway. Trusting little Blanche never questioned a single transaction. A woman's laugh followed, younger, sharper than mine had ever been. Poor thing. If only she knew you'd been planning this since her diagnosis 6 months ago. Though I suppose it doesn't matter now, does it? The doctors said the complications from surgery make survival unlikely. Exactly. By next week, we'll be sipping champagne in Barcelona, and all of this will be behind us. Jeff's footsteps moved closer to my bed. She won't need any of it where she's going. I forced my breathing to remain steady, my eyes to stay closed, even as my mind raced with the implications of what I'd just heard. Jeff, my husband of 12 years, the man I'd supported through law school, who'd held my hand during my cancer treatments, had been systematically draining our accounts while I fought for my life. But Jeff Henderson had made one crucial miscalculation. He'd married a cryptocurrency analyst. My name is Blanche Jensen, and for the past 8 years, I'd been working as a senior blockchain analyst for quantum financial technologies. What started as a side interest in digital currencies during the early days of Bitcoin had evolved into a sophisticated understanding of cryptocurrency markets, blockchain technology, and most importantly, how to move and hide digital assets in ways that traditional banking could never trace. Jeff knew I worked something with computers and finance, but he'd never shown interest in the technical details. While he focused on climbing the ladder at his law firm, Henderson and Associates, the irony of our shared surname wasn't lost on me. I'd been quietly building a digital fortune that existed completely outside the traditional banking system he understood. Our marriage had started strong. Jeff was a promising young attorney with political aspirations, and I was a financial analyst with a steady income and family money from my late parents' estate. We'd seemed like the perfect power couple, his charisma and legal mind paired with my analytical skills and inherited wealth. But somewhere around year 7, things began to shift. Jeff started working later, traveling more frequently for cases, and showing less interest in our conversations about anything beyond surface-level pleasantries. I'd attributed it to career stress and the natural evolution of a long marriage. The cancer diagnosis 18 months ago had changed everything, or so I'd thought. Jeff had seemed supportive, attending doctor appointments, researching treatment options, even suggesting I take extended medical leave to focus on recovery. I'd been touched by his attentiveness, grateful for his encouragement to not worry about money or work. Now, lying in this hospital bed with machines keeping track of my vital signs, I realized that Jeff's support had been strategic positioning. He'd been calculating the timeline of my illness, mapping out how to maximize his financial gain from my death. What Jeff didn't know, what no one knew, was that starting in 2016, I'd begun converting portions of my salary and investment returns into cryptocurrency. Not the obvious coins that made headlines, but carefully researched blockchain projects that I'd analyzed through my professional work. I'd used multiple wallets, complex security protocols, and privacy coins that couldn't be traced through traditional financial investigation methods. The portfolio had grown from a modest $50,000 initial investment to $2.8 million across various digital assets. Every month for 8 years, I'd systematically moved money into this parallel financial universe, that existed completely outside Jeff's awareness or access. I'd originally intended it as our retirement security, a hedge against market crashes and economic uncertainty. The irony was bitter. The very secrecy that was meant to protect our future was now the only thing standing between me and complete financial devastation. As consciousness fully returned over the following hours, I began piecing together the full extent of Jeff's betrayal. The joint checking account we'd used for household expenses, $45,000 gone. Our shared savings account, $78,000 transferred out. The investment account we'd built together, $117,000 liquidated. But the most devastating revelation came when I realized the timeline. Samantha had mentioned 6 months of planning, which meant Jeff had been orchestrating this financial theft since my cancer diagnosis. Every supportive gesture, every encouraging word about not worrying about finances, had been cover for systematic embezzlement. Samantha's voice suggested someone young and confident, likely the paralegal Jeff had mentioned hiring at his firm 9 months ago. The same paralegal he'd praised for her dedication and willingness to work late on important cases. The pieces of their affair timeline aligned perfectly with his increased detachment from our marriage. Through careful listening during their subsequent visits, I learned more about their relationship and plans. They'd booked a 3-week European vacation, using what Samantha called Blanche's farewell tour money. They'd already begun shopping for a house together, with Jeff promising to propose once a decent mourning period had passed. As I lay there processing the magnitude of their betrayal, something unexpected happened. Instead of devastation or heartbreak, I felt a cold, calculating calm settling over me. My analytical mind, the same one that had built a hidden cryptocurrency fortune, began working through the problem systematically. Jeff had access to our traditional accounts because I trusted him with passwords and financial management, but he had no knowledge of my digital assets because they existed in a sphere he'd never bothered to understand. His theft, while emotionally devastating, had only touched the surface of my actual financial resources. More importantly, his assumption that I would die from surgical complications meant he wasn't expecting me to discover his crimes. He and Samantha were operating under the belief that they had unlimited time to execute their plan without consequences. They were about to learn that underestimating a cryptocurrency analyst was a very expensive mistake. My professional background had taught me that the most successful blockchain investigations required patience, meticulous documentation, and perfect timing. Financial crimes left digital footprints that could be traced, analyzed, and used as irrefutable evidence, if you knew how to look. Jeff's legal training had made him confident in traditional asset protection and transfer methods, but he was operating in my domain now, dealing with digital evidence trails that his conventional legal education had never prepared him to handle or hide. As I lay in that hospital bed, listening to my husband and his mistress plan their future with my stolen money, I began formulating a response that would combine my technical expertise with his own legal system against him. The quiet cryptocurrency analyst they thought they'd silenced was about to speak very loudly through the language of blockchain justice. 12 years earlier, I'd met Jeff Henderson at a charity fundraiser for the local children's hospital. He was a third-year law student volunteering his time, passionate about pro bono work and full of idealistic plans to reform the legal system. I was a junior financial analyst, recently hired by Quantum Financial Technologies, still mourning my parents' death in a car accident 6 months prior. Jeff had approached me during the silent auction, making a joke about how the legal profession and finance were natural enemies in the wild, but maybe we could broker a peace treaty. His charm was effortless, the kind that made you feel like you were the only person in the room worth talking to. When he asked about my work, he seemed genuinely interested in my explanations of market analysis and investment strategies. "You're like a detective," he'd said, "but instead of solving crimes, you're solving the mystery of where money wants to go." It was a simplistic comparison, but his enthusiasm felt authentic. I'd been lonely since my parents' death, inheriting their substantial estate but losing the emotional anchors that had grounded my life. Our courtship moved quickly. Jeff was ambitious and hard-working, but law school loans had left him financially strained. I found myself naturally taking on more of our expenses, dinners, weekend trips, even helping with his textbooks and study materials. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. It felt good to be needed, to use my inherited wealth to support someone I loved. When we married 2 years later, combining our finances seemed logical. Jeff was starting at a respected firm, Henderson and Associates, owned by his uncle, with a clear path toward partnership. I was advancing at Quantum Financial, my analytical skills earning recognition and steady promotions. Together, we appeared to be building toward the kind of successful dual-career marriage that looked perfect from the outside. I handled our financial planning because numbers were my strength, and Jeff was grateful to focus on establishing his legal career. We opened joint accounts, made me the primary contact for investments, and established what felt like a true partnership. Jeff would joke that he married up financially, but it never seemed to bother his ego. If anything, he seemed proud of my success. In 2016, a colleague at Quantum Financial mentioned Bitcoin during a lunch conversation. Cryptocurrency was still considered experimental technology, dismissed by most traditional financial institutions as either a fad or an outright scam. But my analytical background made me curious about the underlying blockchain technology. I started small, investing $5,000 of my own money into Bitcoin when it was trading around $600 per coin. I didn't tell Jeff initially because I knew he'd consider it gambling rather than investing. His legal mind preferred traditional assets with established precedent and regulatory frameworks. When that initial investment tripled within 8 months, I began researching other cryptocurrencies more seriously. My background in financial analysis gave me tools to evaluate blockchain projects that most retail investors lacked. I could read white papers, understand technical architectures, and identify projects with genuine utility versus those riding speculative hype. What started as a $5,000 experiment became a parallel financial life. Each month, I'd convert a portion of my salary into carefully selected digital assets. I used multiple wallets, complex security protocols, and privacy-focused cryptocurrencies that existed entirely outside traditional banking systems. Jeff noticed the slight reduction in my contributions to our joint savings, but I explained it as increased 401k contributions or higher taxes on my bonuses. His disinterest in financial details made these explanations easy to accept. When he asked about my computer money hobby, I'd mention small gains or losses that made it seem like a minor side interest rather than a sophisticated investment strategy. The psychological satisfaction of building this secret wealth was intoxicating. Every successful trade, every doubling of value, felt like proof of my expertise in a field Jeff couldn't understand or control. It became my private domain of competence and independence within our marriage. Around year 7 of our marriage, Jeff's behavior began shifting in ways I initially attributed to career stress. He was working toward senior associate status at the firm, taking on bigger cases and more responsibility. Late nights became routine, weekend work became common, and our conversations increasingly focused on his professional challenges rather than our shared life. I compensated by throwing myself deeper into both my career at Quantum Financial and my cryptocurrency research. The digital asset portfolio was approaching $500,000 by this point, spread across 15 different blockchain projects I'd analyzed and believed in long term. The success felt like validation of my judgment and independence. When Jeff forgot our anniversary dinner or missed important family events, I told myself it was temporary, the sacrifice successful couples made during crucial career phases. When he stopped asking about my work or showing interest in my thoughts about financial markets, I filled that intellectual void with online cryptocurrency communities and professional development. 18 months ago, routine blood work revealed irregularities that led to more tests, then biopsies, then the devastating diagnosis, aggressive ovarian cancer, stage 3. The oncologist explained treatment options with clinical precision: surgery, chemotherapy, radiation, with survival rates that varied based on how quickly we acted. Jeff's response seemed supportive and loving. He insisted I take immediate medical leave from Quantum Financial, promising that his income and our savings would cover all expenses. He researched treatment facilities, drove me to appointments, and even took notes during meetings with doctors. I felt grateful for his strength during my moment of greatest vulnerability. "Don't worry about money or work," he'd said repeatedly. "Focus entirely on getting better. Everything else can wait." I'd been touched by his selflessness, interpreting his financial management as evidence that our marriage was stronger than I'd realized. What I didn't recognize was that Jeff was using my medical leave and treatment schedule to gain complete control over our traditional financial accounts. He convinced me to sign power of attorney documents just in case I was too sick from chemotherapy to handle financial decisions. He took over all bill paying, investment management, and banking oversight. During my worst treatment days, when nausea and fatigue made concentration impossible, Jeff would bring me documents to sign without explaining details. "Just routine stuff," he'd say. "Insurance forms and medical expense tracking." I trusted him completely, grateful that someone was handling the administrative burden while I fought for my life. The cryptocurrency portfolio continued growing during this period, reaching nearly $2 million as the market experienced significant gains. Managing it became a mental escape during treatment, something I could control when everything else felt chaotic and uncertain. Jeff never asked about it because he'd long since dismissed my computer money as an expensive hobby he didn't need to understand. My treatment was successful. After 8 months of surgery, chemotherapy, and radiation, my oncologist declared me cancer-free with excellent prognosis for full recovery. Jeff celebrated appropriately, taking me on a recovery vacation to the mountains and talking about our future together with renewed optimism. But I noticed changes in his behavior that felt different from the pre-cancer years. He seemed distracted during conversations, secretive about his phone, and less interested in physical intimacy. When I attributed these changes to the stress of my illness, he agreed readily, perhaps too readily. "We both need time to process everything we've been through," he'd say. "Cancer affects the whole family, not just the patient." It sounded reasonable, even insightful. I focused on returning to work and rebuilding my strength rather than analyzing the growing emotional distance between us. 6 months ago, I developed complications that required additional surgery, not cancer-related, but serious enough to require hospitalization and recovery time. Jeff's concern seemed genuine, his support unwavering. He handled all the logistics, managed communications with my employer, and assured me that our finances were secure. "You've been through enough," he'd said. "Let me take care of everything else." I'd agreed gratefully, not realizing that everything else included systematically transferring our joint assets into accounts I couldn't access. The night before my surgery, Jeff held my hand and told me how much he loved me, how proud he was of my strength, and how he'd take care of everything if the worst happened. I'd fallen asleep feeling secure in his love and protection. I woke up to discover that the worst had indeed happened, just not the way I'd expected. The morning of my surgery, Jeff had been unusually attentive. He'd arrived at 6 a.m. with my favorite coffee and white roses, the same flowers from our first anniversary. His romantic behavior struck me as unusual given the months of emotional distance in our relationship. "I know this isn't cancer-related," he'd said, squeezing my hand in pre-op, "but any surgery is scary. I want you to know that no matter what happens, I'll take care of everything. You don't need to worry about a single thing outside of getting better." Dr. Emily Gunther, my surgeon, had explained the procedure multiple times: removal of ovarian cysts developed post-cancer treatment, complicated by adhesions from previous surgeries. She estimated 3 hours of operating time with 5 to 7 days hospital recovery, followed by 2 weeks restricted activity at home. "Standard procedure," Dr. Gunther assured us. "Blanche's overall health is excellent post-cancer treatment. We're just cleaning up scar tissue and removing benign cysts. I've done this surgery hundreds of times." Jeff kissed my forehead as they wheeled me to the operating room. "I love you," he whispered. "See you when you wake up." Those words would haunt me later, knowing what he really meant was goodbye forever. What should have been routine 3-hour procedure turned into an 8-hour nightmare. Dr. Gunther later explained that adhesions from my cancer treatments were far more extensive than imaging had revealed. They'd had to carefully separate organs that had fused together, requiring microsurgical precision to avoid damaging vital structures. During the lengthy procedure, my blood pressure dropped dangerously low twice, requiring emergency interventions to stabilize my condition. At one point, Dr. Gunther told me later, they'd considered stopping the surgery and scheduling a second operation, but the risks of leaving work unfinished outweighed the dangers of continuing. We had some tense moments, she admitted during a post-surgery visit. Your body was under more stress than we anticipated. For about 20 minutes, we weren't sure which way things were going to go. What I didn't know was that during those critical 20 minutes, when my survival was genuinely uncertain, Jeff had been in the waiting room making phone calls that had nothing to do with medical updates to family members. Through fragments I would piece together later, Jeff's response to surgical complications revealed his true priorities. When Dr. Gunther emerged after hour 6 to explain extended surgery time and potential risks, Jeff's first question hadn't been about my condition, it had been about timelines for making end-of-life decisions. If things go badly, he'd asked Dr. Gunther, how quickly would we need to make arrangements? The surgeon had been taken aback, explaining they were nowhere near that point and complications, while serious, were manageable. But Jeff had already begun making calls. First to Samantha, updating her on what he described as Blanche's critical condition. Second, to our insurance company, inquiring about life insurance claim procedures and required documentation. Third, to our bank, asking about protocols for accessing accounts when the primary holder was incapacitated or deceased. While I fought for stability on the operating table, Jeff performed the devoted husband role in the surgical waiting area. He'd called my sister Courtney Hayes, who lived 3 states away, describing my condition in dramatically pessimistic terms. The doctors aren't optimistic, he'd told her, voice heavy with manufactured grief. They're saying the next 24 hours are critical. You might want to consider flying out here, just in case. Courtney, panicked by his assessment, immediately booked the next available flight. He'd also contacted my supervisor at Quantum Financial, Emily Gunther, sharing the surgeon's name, explaining I was fighting for my life, and my return to work was extremely unlikely. He'd requested immediate information about life insurance benefits and procedures for accessing my 401k in case of death. What made these conversations particularly calculating was their timing. Jeff was making these calls while Dr. Gunther was still in surgery, before any medical professional had provided realistic prognosis assessment. He was operating on the assumption of my death, while I was still alive and fighting. During the extended surgery hours, Jeff initiated the first transfers from our joint accounts. Using his power of attorney and the emergency nature of my medical situation, he authorized several large transactions described to bank representatives as covering critical medical expenses not covered by insurance. A $25,000 transfer for experimental treatments insurance wouldn't approve. Another $18,000 for specialized medical equipment I would need during recovery. A third transfer of $32,000 to secure a private recovery facility, providing better care than standard hospital discharge planning. None of these expenses were real. Jeff was using my medical emergency as cover for moving our assets into accounts only he could access. Banks, sympathetic to a husband dealing with his wife's life-threatening surgery, processed these transfers without usual verification procedures. By the time Dr. Gunther successfully completed my surgery and moved me to recovery, Jeff had already transferred $75,000 from our joint accounts into private accounts he'd opened weeks earlier. He'd done this while I was unconscious and fighting surgical complications, using my vulnerable state as the perfect opportunity to begin stealing our life savings. When I began regaining consciousness 12 hours post-surgery, Jeff was at my bedside with an Oscar-worthy performance of relief and gratitude. He held my hand, tears in his eyes, describing how worried he'd been during touch-and-go moments when my survival was uncertain. "I thought I was going to lose you," he said, voice breaking with emotion. "Dr. Gunther said there were complications, that you were in critical condition for hours. I was so scared, Blanche. I realized how much I need you, how empty my life would be without you. His performance was so convincing that I felt guilty for the emotional distance I'd perceived in our marriage over recent months. Here was proof that Jeff truly loved me, that the stress and distraction I'd noticed were simply signs of a man struggling with his wife's health challenges. "I've taken care of everything," he assured me as I drifted in and out of consciousness. "All the medical bills, insurance paperwork, everything. You don't need to think about anything except getting stronger. I've handled all the financial details so you can focus entirely on recovery." I'd squeezed his hand weakly, grateful for his strength and organization during my vulnerability. I had no idea that taking care of everything meant systematically draining our accounts while I fought for my life. By my third day of recovery, I was alert enough to notice patterns in Jeff's behavior that didn't align with his concerned husband performance. The first red flag was the timing of his phone calls. Every morning around 9 a.m., Jeff would step into the hallway to call your office about medical leave, but these conversations seemed unusually long and intense for routine HR communication. I could hear fragments through the partially open door, not words, but tone. Jeff's voice carried tension and urgency that didn't match his casual explanations when he returned to my bedside. When I asked about work complications, he'd wave dismissively and say, "Just bureaucratic nonsense, don't worry about it." The second pattern involved afternoon calls Jeff claimed were insurance-related. These conversations happened during my scheduled rest periods, when pain medication made me drowsy, but I wasn't completely unconscious. The snippets I caught included phrases like liquidation timeline and beneficiary access protocols, language more sophisticated than typical insurance claim discussions. Most concerning were evening calls Jeff took in the hospital parking lot. He would excuse himself to get some fresh air and return 20 to 30 minutes later. Through my window, I could see him pacing near his car, phone pressed to his ear, gesturing in ways that suggested heated discussions or complex negotiation. On day 4, hospital billing administrator Oscar Gunther visited my room to discuss insurance coverage and payment arrangements. What should have been routine conversation revealed the first concrete signs that something was wrong with our finances. "We've processed initial insurance payments," Oscar explained, "but there are several charges requiring out-of-pocket payment. Your husband authorized transfers from your joint checking account to cover the excess, but we're showing insufficient funds for the additional procedures Dr. Gunther recommended." I felt confused. Our joint checking account had maintained a balance of over $45,000 before my surgery, more than enough to cover any medical expenses not covered by insurance. "There must be a mistake," I told Oscar. "We have substantial funds in that account." Oscar checked his records again, then showed me payment authorizations Jeff had signed. "According to our finance department, your husband transferred $28,000 from your joint account 3 days ago to cover surgical costs, but the account shows a current balance of only $3,200. When Jeff returned from his afternoon fresh air break, I asked about the account balance. His explanation came too quickly, as if rehearsed. The insurance company had delays in processing payments, he said. I had to cover some expenses temporarily from our other accounts. Everything will balance out once insurance catches up. But I'd been managing our finances for 12 years. I knew we didn't have other accounts with that kind of liquidity, beyond our savings and investment accounts, which required both signatures for large withdrawals. Another subtle warning sign emerged through Jeff's management of my visitors. My sister Courtney had flown in from Denver after Jeff's dramatic phone call about my critical condition. When she arrived and saw that I was recovering normally from clearly routine surgery, she seemed confused by the discrepancy between Jeff's description and my actual state. "Jeff made it sound like you were dying," Courtney whispered during a moment when he'd stepped out. "He said the doctors weren't optimistic, that I needed to come immediately, but you look tired and sore, not critical." I'd attributed this to Jeff's anxiety and tendency toward dramatic overstatement during stressful situations. But when my colleague Emily from Quantum Financial tried to visit, Jeff intercepted her in the lobby and explained that I was too fragile for work-related conversations and that my prognosis made returning to my job highly unlikely. Emily later called my room directly to express confusion. "Blanche, Jeff told me you might not survive your complications, but you sound completely normal. What's really going on? Her question planted the first seed of genuine suspicion about Jeff's narrative management. During my recovery week, Jeff became obsessed with collecting medical documents and forms. He would arrive each morning with a manila folder asking nurses for copies of everything: daily progress notes, medication schedules, doctor consultations, even cafeteria receipts from his hospital meals. Insurance companies require extensive documentation, he'd explain when medical staff questioned the thoroughness of his record keeping. I want to make sure we have everything we need for reimbursement and any potential complications. But his focus seemed unusual. Rather than collecting documents related to my care and recovery, Jeff was particularly interested in records that documented the severity of my surgical complications and any statements about prognosis or long-term effects. He would spend considerable time reviewing these documents, making notes in margins, and asking detailed questions about medical terminology. Gunther mentioned during one visit that my recovery was proceeding better than expected, given the complexity of the surgery. Jeff's reaction seemed almost disappointed. He pressed her for more details about potential future complications or signs that my condition might deteriorate. As someone who'd spent years analyzing digital financial patterns, I was naturally attuned to technology usage habits. Jeff's phone and laptop behavior during my hospitalization struck me as increasingly secretive and urgent. He would step away for important calls multiple times per day, always taking his phone to private locations. When he used his laptop in my room, he would angle the screen away from my bed and close applications quickly when medical staff entered. These weren't the behaviors of someone managing routine medical logistics or work responsibilities. Most tellingly, Jeff had changed his phone habits entirely. Previously, he'd been casual about leaving his phone accessible, often asking me to check messages or look up information. During my hospitalization, his phone was constantly in his possession, face down, and secured with new passcode protections I'd never seen him use. Despite Jeff's performance of devoted concern, there was an emotional quality to his interactions that felt hollow. His expressions of love and worry seemed scripted, delivered with the timing and intonation of someone reciting lines, rather than expressing genuine feelings. When I was in pain or struggling with medication side effects, Jeff's sympathy felt perfunctory. He would say the right words and make appropriate gestures, but there was a distracted quality to his attention, as if he was thinking about other priorities while performing the role of caring husband. The most unsettling moment came when I woke from a medication-induced nap to find Jeff standing at my bedside, staring at me with an expression I couldn't interpret. When he realized I was awake, he immediately shifted into his concerned husband performance, but for just a moment, I'd seen something cold and calculating in his eyes. Perhaps the most disturbing pattern involved my pain medication management. Jeff had taken charge of communicating with nurses about my medication schedule, claiming he wanted to make sure Blanche gets optimal pain control during recovery. But I began noticing that my prescribed pain medication doses seemed to make me more drowsy and disoriented than expected. When I mentioned this to my day nurse, she checked my chart and seemed confused. "Your husband has been requesting that we maximize your comfort medications," she explained. "He's very concerned about your pain levels." The issue was that my actual pain was manageable with lower doses. Jeff was advocating for medication levels that kept me sedated and less alert during the times when he was conducting his mysterious phone calls and meetings. It was a subtle form of management that ensured I couldn't fully observe or question his activities. When I requested that my medication be reduced to the minimum effective dose, Jeff objected strongly, insisting that I needed aggressive pain management for proper healing. His resistance to my own assessment of my pain levels was both paternalistic and suspicious. The analytical mind that had built a secret cryptocurrency fortune was beginning to recognize patterns that pointed toward systematic deception. But the full scope of Jeff's betrayal was still hidden beneath layers of performance and manipulation that would take careful investigation to uncover. Day 7 of my recovery brought the moment when suspicion crystallized into devastating certainty. I had been drifting in and out of sleep due to pain medication when voices in the hallway outside my room penetrated my consciousness. Jeff's voice was unmistakable, but he was speaking to someone I didn't recognize, a woman with a younger, sharper tone than any of the medical staff I'd encountered. The life insurance alone will set us up for years, Samantha, Jeff was saying, his voice carrying that familiar smugness I'd learned to recognize during arguments about money. Plus, I've already moved everything from the joint accounts. She always left the finances to me anyway, trusting little Blanche never questioned a single transaction. My blood turned to ice as the pieces fell into place. Samantha, the paralegal Jeff had hired 9 months ago, the one he'd praised for working late on important cases. The woman's laugh that followed was young and confident, completely devoid of sympathy for a wife fighting for recovery just feet away. Poor thing, Samantha continued with mock sympathy. If only she knew you'd been planning this since her diagnosis 6 months ago. Though I suppose it doesn't matter now, does it? The doctors said the complications from surgery make survival unlikely. I forced my breathing to remain steady, my body to stay motionless, even as my heart hammered against my ribs. Jeff's response revealed the full scope of his calculation. Exactly. By next week, we'll be sipping champagne in Barcelona, and all of this will be behind us. She won't need any of it where she's going. As their conversation continued, the true timeline of Jeff's betrayal became horrifyingly clear. This wasn't an opportunistic decision made during my current hospitalization. It was a systematic plan that had been in motion since my cancer diagnosis 18 months ago. I still can't believe how perfectly the cancer worked out, Samantha said, with casual cruelty. Getting her to sign those power of attorney documents, taking over all the finances while she was too sick to pay attention. You were brilliant to use her medical leave as cover for restructuring everything. Jeff's laugh was cold and proud. The best part is how grateful she was for my supports during her treatment. Every document I had her sign, every account I took control of, she thought I was being the devoted husband. Even this surgery was perfect timing. The complications give us medical cover for any financial decisions I need to make. I realized with sickening clarity that Jeff had been using my cancer treatment as a systematic opportunity to gain control of our assets. Every moment when I'd felt grateful for his strength and support, he'd been positioning himself to steal everything I'd worked for. Through their continued conversation, I learned more about Samantha than I'd ever wanted to know. She was 28 years old, recently graduated from paralegal school, and had targeted Jeff as much as he'd pursued her. Their relationship had begun during my cancer treatment, when I was at my most vulnerable and dependent on Jeff's supposed support. The best part, Samantha was saying, is that she actually thinks you love her. Even now, lying in that hospital bed, she's probably grateful for your devotion. She has no idea that every "I love you" for the past year has been an investment in our future. Jeff's response revealed the depth of his deception. Honestly, maintaining the performance has been exhausting. Do you know how hard it is to act concerned about someone's recovery when you're hoping they don't make one? But we're almost done. A few more days of playing the grieving husband, then we're free. As they discussed their plans, the full extent of Jeff's theft became apparent. He hadn't just emptied our joint accounts, he'd been systematically transferring assets for months, using my medical condition as justification for emergency financial restructuring. The European vacation is just the beginning, Jeff was explaining. Once the life insurance pays out, we'll have close to $500,000 to start fresh. Plus, the house will sell quickly in this market. By Christmas, we'll be permanently relocated and completely unreachable. Samantha's excitement was palpable, and you're sure there's no way she can trace any of it. No hidden accounts or assets she could recover. Jeff's confidence was absolute. Blanche is brilliant with traditional finance, but she's never paid attention to the legal structures I've been creating. Every transfer has been documented as legitimate medical expenses or emergency asset protection. Even if she somehow survived and tried to challenge it, the paper trail makes me look like a devoted husband protecting our resources during a medical crisis. The most disturbing revelation came when they discussed how Jeff had been manipulating my medical care to support his narrative. He'd been exaggerating my condition to medical staff, requesting documentation of complications and poor prognosis, and even influencing my medication management to keep me sedated during critical decision-making periods. The beauty of her medication schedule, Jeff explained, is that she's barely conscious during business hours when I need to handle the account transfers. By the time she's alert enough to ask questions, I can just tell her she was hallucinating from the pain meds. I realized that Jeff's insistence on aggressive pain management hadn't been concern for my comfort. It was a strategy to keep me compliant and unaware, while he systematically stole our life savings. Their conversation revealed a detailed exit strategy that Jeff had been planning for months. They had already booked a 3-week European vacation starting in 5 days, timed to coincide with what Jeff had told medical staff would be my expected decline. They'd secured apartments in Barcelona and Prague, established European bank accounts, and even researched countries with favorable extradition policies. Once we're in Spain, Samantha was saying, we'll have time to plan the permanent relocation. Jeff thinks Portugal offers the best combination of lifestyle and legal protection. Jeff's response chilled me. The important thing is being out of the country when Blanche's condition deteriorates. I need to be unreachable when the hospital starts making end-of-life decisions. Distance will give me plausible deniability and emotional cover. As their conversation wound down, the most horrifying aspect became clear. Jeff wasn't just stealing my money, he was actively hoping for my death to make his crimes easier to cover up. Every visit to my bedside, every expression of concern, every gentle touch had been part of an elaborate performance designed to maintain his innocent husband facade, while he drained our accounts. I almost feel guilty, Samantha said with obviously fake remorse. She seems like a nice person. Jeff's response revealed the complete absence of conscience. Nice doesn't pay for the lifestyle we want. Besides, she's had a good run. 12 years of marriage to a successful lawyer, a comfortable life funded by her parents' money. If she doesn't make it through recovery, at least she'll have died thinking she was loved. As their footsteps faded down the hallway, I lay in my hospital bed processing the magnitude of what I'd just learned. The husband I'd supported through law school, trusted with our finances, and relied on during my medical crisis, had been systematically destroying everything we'd built together. But as the initial shock gave way to analytical thinking, I realized something Jeff had fundamentally miscalculated. His confidence about my lack of hidden accounts or assets was completely wrong. The $2.8 million cryptocurrency portfolio he knew nothing about represented not just my financial security, but the perfect tool for proving his crimes and ensuring he faced consequences. Jeff thought he was stealing from a helpless victim. Instead, he was about to discover he'd targeted a cryptocurrency analyst with the technical skills and financial resources to fight back in ways his traditional legal mind couldn't anticipate or defend against. That night, after Jeff left claiming he needed rest at home, I made the most important decision of my life. Instead of confronting him immediately, I chose to do what I did best, analyze the situation systematically, and build an airtight case using my professional skills. My first challenge was maintaining the facade of a sedated, recovering patient while conducting a thorough investigation. Jeff's strategy of keeping me medicated actually worked to my advantage. I could claim confusion from pain medication while secretly gathering evidence. My primary nurse, Courtney Henderson, became my crucial first ally. Her background in financial crimes, before transitioning to medical nursing, made her naturally suspicious of Jeff's unusual behavior around my financial arrangements. "Your husband's questions are more administrative than caring," she observed during a medication check. "Most spouses focus on recovery timelines. His focus on insurance procedures and end-of-life documentation is concerning." When I confided my suspicions about unauthorized financial activities, Courtney's expression shifted to professional concern. "I've seen this pattern before, family members who view a patient's medical crisis as a financial opportunity." Courtney helped me establish secure methods for conducting my investigation without Jeff's knowledge. She provided hospital tablets during her shifts, allowing access to secure internet connections that wouldn't appear on our home network. Most importantly, Courtney agreed to document Jeff's suspicious conversations and behaviors during his visits. Her medical training made her an excellent witness, and her previous financial crimes experience meant she understood the importance of maintaining detailed records. Using the hospital's secure internet, I began tracing Jeff's financial activities. My first step was accessing our joint account statements through online banking credentials Jeff didn't know I'd memorized. The pattern I discovered was systematic and devastating. Starting 3 months ago, Jeff had been making regular transfers to legitimate appearing medical service providers that were actually shell corporations with no business operations. Most damaging was a series of emergency medical expense transfers, totaling $127,000 to accounts in Jeff's name only. He'd been using my medical condition as justification for moving our joint assets into accounts I couldn't access. My secret cryptocurrency portfolio became the perfect investigative tool. Unlike traditional banking, cryptocurrency transactions could be analyzed using blockchain forensics that provided complete transaction histories without alerting the parties involved. Using privacy-focused cryptocurrencies, I hired professional financial investigators who specialized in tracing hidden assets and offshore accounts. Within 48 hours, I had detailed reports on Jeff's financial activities, including bank accounts I'd never known existed, and real estate purchases made with our joint resources. Through my investigation, I identified multiple criminal violations, embezzlement, fraud, forgery, and potentially attempted murder given his medical manipulation. More importantly, I found evidence of civil violations that would allow me to freeze his access to remaining assets. Using secure communication methods, I contacted family law attorney Elvis Gunther, who specialized in emergency asset protection for fraud victims. Elvis agreed to begin preparing legal documents that would freeze Jeff's access to joint assets and challenge the transfers he'd already made. The investigation phase was revealing the full scope of Jeff's systematic betrayal while providing me with the evidence needed to ensure he faced serious consequences. Working with my cryptocurrency-funded forensic team, I discovered Jeff's theft was far more sophisticated than initially realized. This wasn't opportunistic crime, it was an 18-month financial dismantling that had begun 2 weeks after my cancer diagnosis. The investigators provided a comprehensive timeline revealing Jeff's systematic approach. He'd created shell corporations with names similar to legitimate medical providers, opened business accounts justified as emergency medical expense management, and established offshore banking relationships through asset protection law firms. The total stolen was staggering: $347,000 from joint accounts, $78,000 from liquidated retirement funds, $125,000 from a home equity line opened without my knowledge, and $89,000 from investment assets I'd thought were still in our portfolio. The most shocking discovery involved our family home. Jeff had systematically refinanced our mortgage without my knowledge, increasing our balance from $180,000 to $420,000 and pocketing the difference through fake home improvement loans. Worse, Jeff had listed our home for sale through a real estate agent, planning to complete the transaction while I was supposedly dying. The listing description was cruel: motivated seller due to family medical emergency, quick sale required for medical expenses. Jeff hadn't just planned to collect my life insurance, he'd been actively manipulating policies to maximize payout while minimizing investigation risk. 6 months ago, he'd increased my coverage from $200,000 to $500,000 and added accidental death provisions for additional payouts during hospitalization. Most disturbing was Jeff's communication with insurance companies during my hospitalization, providing detailed medical updates that consistently exaggerated my condition and painted inevitable decline. The insurance company had begun preliminary claim processing based on his representations of my imminent death. Background investigation revealed Samantha was far more than Jeff's mistress. She was his full business partner. Using paralegal skills, she'd created legal documentation for shell corporations and offshore transactions while conducting similar operations with at least 2 other men over 5 years. Her method was sophisticated: identify married men with financial access to vulnerable spouses, establish romantic relationships during stressful periods, then use legal knowledge to help protect assets through structures that actually facilitated theft. Jeff and Samantha's European vacation was actually permanent relocation. They'd established bank accounts in Spain, Portugal, and Switzerland, created business entities in countries with strong banking privacy, and purchased Portuguese real estate through shell corporations. Their timeline was precise: complete asset theft, collect life insurance, sell our home, and transfer everything to European accounts before investigation could begin. They'd researched extradition laws and chosen countries where American financial crime prosecution would be difficult. Working with Courtney, I gathered comprehensive evidence of Jeff's medical care manipulation. He'd been providing false information to insurance companies, exaggerating my condition to medical staff, and potentially interfering with treatment to support his deterioration narrative. Most shocking was discovering Jeff had researched drugs and procedures that could worsen my condition. Browser history showed searches for medication interactions, surgical patients, and complications post-cancer surgery, suggesting he'd considered ways to ensure my condition deteriorated naturally. The investigators' analysis revealed the chilling convergence. Everything was scheduled to complete during my current hospitalization. European bank activation, home sale closing, final asset transfers, and their Spain flights, all within 7 days. Jeff had calculated that my death during surgical complications would provide perfect cover for completing his escape. He would appear as a grieving widower handling overwhelming medical expenses, making large transactions seem reasonable rather than suspicious. But Jeff had miscalculated. The $2.8 million cryptocurrency portfolio he'd dismissed as worthless was about to become the foundation for his complete destruction. Using advanced blockchain analysis tools from my professional background, I traced digital footprints Jeff and Samantha believed were invisible. My cryptocurrency portfolio wasn't just financial security, it provided access to investigative capabilities traditional law enforcement often lacked. The breakthrough came when forensic teams discovered Jeff had been converting stolen funds into cryptocurrency for international transfers. He'd used a poorly secured exchange that maintained detailed transaction logs, creating an immutable blockchain record of every criminal transaction. Every transfer from our accounts to his shell corporations was followed by cryptocurrency purchases, international transfers, and conversions to European currency. Jeff thought he was obscuring the money trail, but he'd actually created permanent evidence of money laundering. My years analyzing financial patterns became crucial in identifying the sophisticated nature of Jeff and Samantha's operation. This wasn't their first collaboration. Forensic teams uncovered evidence of at least 3 previous schemes targeting vulnerable spouses in different states. The pattern was chilling. Samantha identified married men with significant assets and spouses facing medical crises, secured employment providing financial access, then established romantic relationships during the most stressful marriage periods. Jeff was her most ambitious target, but not her first. Previous schemes in Texas, Florida, and Colorado followed identical methodology: exploit medical crises for financial control, establish offshore assets, then disappear while spouses were too ill or deceased to pursue justice. Working with international forensic teams, I accessed deleted communications revealing the calculated nature of their partnership. Using cryptocurrency-funded data recovery services, we retrieved messages Jeff thought were permanently erased. Recovered communications were damning. 8-month-old messages showed Samantha coaching Jeff on medication manipulation, keep her sedated during business hours. Confusion from pain meds will explain memory gaps about financial decisions. Their biggest mistake was underestimating my hobby account. Messages showed they estimated my cryptocurrency holdings at maybe $10,000, not the $2.8 million I'd accumulated through professional analysis and investment. The investigation revealed Jeff and Samantha were part of a larger network, specializing in financial exploitation of vulnerable individuals. This network included corrupt attorneys, unethical financial advisors, and criminal paralegals sharing information about potential targets. Kurt Jensen, the financial advisor, who'd visited my hospital room, was part of this network. He specialized in creating legal structures, making theft appear legitimate, particularly during medical emergencies or end-of-life planning. Most shocking was discovering Jeff and Samantha's European operation was part of an international money laundering network, helping American criminals relocate assets and establish new identities abroad. The network operated through legitimate appearing services in Portugal, Spain, and Switzerland, providing complete disappearance packages, new bank accounts, business entities, real estate purchases, and residency assistance. Jeff had paid over $150,000 in fees to these services, money stolen from our accounts, and justified as legal consultation fees related to my medical situation. Most urgently, the investigation revealed Jeff and Samantha had accelerated their timeline due to concerns about my unexpected recovery. Messages from the previous day showed panic. Blanche is recovering faster than expected. We need to complete transfers and leave immediately. Their rushed timeline actually helped my case. By accelerating their final moves, they were making mistakes that created additional evidence while giving me a narrow window to intervene before they disappeared permanently. The investigation had provided comprehensive evidence of a criminal enterprise far more sophisticated than simple spousal theft. Now I had documentation to ensure they faced justice for systematic exploitation across multiple states. Among the recovered digital communications, the forensic team uncovered the most devastating evidence of all: detailed discussions between Jeff and Samantha about their long-term deception strategy that revealed the entire foundation of my marriage had been a calculated lie. Messages dating back to our engagement showed Jeff discussing me in purely transactional terms. Blanche's inheritance alone makes her worth the investment. Plus, she's the type who'll handle all the financial management while giving me complete access. Perfect setup for long-term asset extraction. But the cruelest revelation came in messages from our wedding day itself. While I was getting ready, believing I was marrying the love of my life, Jeff was texting Samantha's predecessor, another paralegal named Emily Gunther, who had apparently coached him through his courtship strategy. "The ceremony is about to start," Jeff had written on our wedding morning. "Blanche is so happy, completely convinced this is a fairy tale romance. She has no idea she's signing over control of a $250,000 inheritance to someone who's already planning her financial destruction." The most psychologically devastating discovery was a series of communications showing that Jeff had viewed my cancer diagnosis as a business opportunity rather than a medical crisis requiring his support and love. Messages from the week of my diagnosis revealed his immediate strategic thinking: the cancer is actually perfect timing. Blanche will be vulnerable, grateful for support, and too sick to monitor financial decisions. This could accelerate our timeline by years. Samantha's responses showed she was already researching successful cases of spouses who had used medical crises to gain financial control. I found 3 similar cases where husbands successfully transferred assets during wives' cancer treatments. Key is documenting everything as legitimate medical expenses and emergency planning. Reading these exchanges while lying in a hospital bed, recovering from surgery complications that Jeff had hoped would kill me, was more devastating than any physical pain I'd experienced. Every memory of his support during my cancer treatment was recontaminated by the knowledge that he'd been calculating financial advantage while I fought for my life. Perhaps most heartbreaking were the messages where Jeff and Samantha mocked my personality traits and our marriage in ways that revealed complete contempt for everything I'd thought we shared. "Blanche's biggest weakness is how much she trusts people," Jeff had written 6 months ago. "She actually believes I'm grateful for her financial support during law school. She thinks helping me made me love her more." It's pathetic how naive smart women can be about relationships. Samantha's responses were equally cruel. "The best part is how proud she is of being the financially responsible one in the marriage. She has no idea that her careful budgeting and investment planning just made it easier for you to identify exactly what assets are worth stealing." Their mockery extended to intimate details of our relationship that Jeff had shared as entertainment. Messages included detailed discussions of my vulnerabilities, insecurities, and private moments that I'd shared in trust, all presented as ammunition for their manipulation strategy. Among the most devastating communications were detailed discussions about Samantha replacing me in Jeff's life, including plans for how they would explain my tragic death to friends and family while building their new relationship. "We'll wait exactly 18 months after Blanche's death before announcing our engagement," Jeff had written. "Long enough to appear respectful, but not so long that people forget how devoted I was during her illness." The grieving widower who finds love again makes for a sympathetic narrative. Samantha had researched appropriate timelines for widower relationships and social expectations for mourning periods. Their planning included strategies for how Jeff would appear to be healing from grief while actually celebrating his financial success. Most chilling was their discussion of using my death as a marketing opportunity for their European consulting business. Jeff's story of caring for his dying wife while managing complex financial arrangements will be perfect credentials for helping other couples navigate medical crises. The recovered communications revealed that Jeff had been systematically lying to my family and friends about my condition, creating false narratives that would support his eventual claims about my death while preventing anyone from questioning his financial decisions. Messages showed Jeff coaching Samantha on what to tell people. Blanche has been struggling more than she lets on. The cancer really took a toll, and she's been having cognitive issues that make financial management difficult. It's been heartbreaking to watch her decline. He'd been planting these lies for months, creating a foundation for explaining why he'd taken control of our finances and why my eventual death would be sad but not surprising. Friends who later contacted me directly were confused by the discrepancy between Jeff's reports and my actual condition. Perhaps most violating was the discovery that Jeff and Samantha had conducted extensive research into my family's financial history, including attempts to determine if there were additional assets they could access after my death. They had researched my parents' estate, investigated whether I had any extended family with inheritance potential, and even looked into the possibility that my parents had established trusts or other financial instruments that might benefit their surviving daughter's spouse. Messages revealed Jeff's frustration that my parents' assets had been relatively straightforward. No hidden trusts or offshore accounts with Blanche's family, just the direct inheritance and life insurance. Still substantial, but not the generational wealth I was hoping for. The most disturbing discovery was a series of searches and communications showing that Jeff had been researching ways to ensure my medical condition deteriorated naturally, without leaving evidence of intentional harm. Browser histories and message threads revealed his research into drug interactions that could complicate surgical recovery, medical conditions that could explain sudden deterioration, and even discussions with Samantha about helping nature take its course if my recovery proceeded too successfully. While I found no evidence that Jeff had actually administered anything harmful, his research into methods for worsening my condition revealed a level of malice that went beyond financial crime into potential attempted murder. Communications revealed that every gesture of love and support Jeff had shown during my illness had been carefully calculated to maintain my trust while positioning himself for financial control. Messages between Jeff and Samantha discussed specific manipulation techniques. When Blanche gets scared about her prognosis, that's when I'm most affectionate. Fear makes her more dependent and grateful. She interprets my comfort as evidence of deep love instead of recognizing it as emotional manipulation. They had researched psychological techniques for maintaining control over vulnerable individuals, including strategies for using intermittent affection and support to create emotional dependence that would prevent suspicion about financial irregularities. Perhaps most violating was discovering that Jeff had created detailed psychological profiles of my personality for Samantha, essentially treating me like a case study in successful manipulation. Blanche's need to feel useful and appreciated is her greatest weakness, Jeff had written. She'll accept almost any explanation for financial decisions as long as I frame them as protecting her or honoring her contributions to our marriage. Her financial expertise actually works against her, because she assumes I would never try to deceive someone so knowledgeable about money. These personality assessments revealed that Jeff had been studying me like a predator studies prey, identifying every vulnerability and strength to develop strategies for exploitation. The man I'd loved and trusted had been conducting a systematic psychological analysis to optimize his theft strategy. Reading these communications while recovering from surgery that Jeff had hoped would kill me transformed my grief into something harder and more determined. The quiet cryptocurrency analyst he'd underestimated was about to demonstrate exactly how dangerous it was to systematically exploit someone with both the technical skills and financial resources to fight back. Working with my legal team and forensic investigators, I began organizing the overwhelming amount of evidence into a comprehensive case that could support both criminal prosecution and civil asset recovery. My background in financial analysis proved invaluable for creating documentation that met legal standards while telling a compelling story of systematic fraud. Using secure blockchain-based storage systems, I created an immutable evidence archive that included time-stamped photographs, verified digital communications, authenticated financial records, and expert analysis reports. Each piece of evidence was cross-referenced with multiple corroborating sources to ensure its admissibility in court. The evidence compilation revealed patterns that even surprised my experienced legal team. Elvis Gunther, my family law attorney, told me he'd never seen such comprehensive documentation of financial fraud in a domestic case. Most victims discover the theft after it's complete, he explained. You've documented their crimes in real time while they were committing them. My cryptocurrency-funded forensic team created a detailed timeline that traced every dollar Jeff had stolen, from initial theft through international money laundering. The timeline revealed the sophisticated nature of their operation while providing law enforcement with a roadmap for asset recovery. Starting 18 months ago with Jeff's first unauthorized transfer of $5,000 during my cancer diagnosis, the timeline showed steady escalation through increasingly bold thefts. Each transaction was documented with bank records, communication evidence showing Jeff's justifications, and analysis proving the transfers violated both our power of attorney agreements and state marital property laws. The timeline culminated with Jeff's recent acceleration of asset transfers totaling over $180,000 in the week leading up to their planned European departure. This final flurry of activity provided clear evidence of intent to permanently abscond with stolen funds, supporting charges of felony embezzlement and money laundering. Working with Courtney and Dr. Emily Gunther, I compiled comprehensive evidence of Jeff's manipulation of my medical care and fraudulent misrepresentation of my condition to various institutions. This evidence would support charges of medical fraud and insurance fraud while establishing his intent to cause harm. Hospital records showed a clear pattern of Jeff requesting medication schedules that kept me sedated during business hours, coinciding exactly with the timing of his financial transactions. His requests for documentation of complications and poor prognosis, combined with his misrepresentations to insurance companies, created a paper trail of deliberate medical fraud. Most damaging was audio evidence that Courtney had legally recorded of Jeff's conversations with insurance representatives, where he consistently exaggerated my condition and claimed imminent death to expedite processing of life insurance claims. These recordings provided direct evidence of insurance fraud and demonstrated his systematic deception strategy. The forensic investigation had uncovered evidence that Jeff and Samantha were part of a criminal network operating across multiple states. This evidence would allow prosecutors to pursue federal charges and coordinate with law enforcement agencies in Texas, Florida, and Colorado where similar crimes had occurred. I provided detailed reports showing how Samantha's previous schemes followed identical patterns, including victim selection criteria, exploitation methods, and escape strategies. This pattern evidence would support prosecution arguments that Jeff and Samantha were sophisticated criminals rather than opportunistic individuals who committed crimes of passion. The network evidence also revealed opportunities for asset recovery from previous victims. Bank accounts used in their current scheme contained funds that could be traced to their previous operations, providing law enforcement with additional leverage for prosecution and victim compensation. My cryptocurrency portfolio proved invaluable, not just for funding the investigation, but for demonstrating to prosecutors that I had the financial resources to pursue comprehensive legal action. Many financial fraud cases fail because victims lack the resources for extensive litigation, but my digital assets eliminated that concern. More importantly, my professional understanding of cryptocurrency allowed me to trace Jeff's money laundering activities through blockchain analysis that traditional law enforcement often lacks. I provided prosecutors with detailed reports showing exactly how stolen funds had been converted to digital assets and transferred internationally. The cryptocurrency evidence was particularly valuable because blockchain transactions are immutable and verifiable, creating evidence that Jeff couldn't deny or explain away. Every conversion of stolen funds to digital assets was permanently recorded on public ledgers with timestamps and wallet addresses that could be traced directly to accounts Jeff controlled. Through my legal team, I initiated cooperation with European law enforcement agencies to freeze assets that Jeff and Samantha had transferred to offshore accounts. My cryptocurrency resources allowed me to hire international attorneys who specialized in cross-border asset recovery. The European cooperation proved crucial because Jeff and Samantha's escape plan depended on accessing funds they'd transferred to accounts in Spain, Portugal, and Switzerland. By working with local authorities to freeze these accounts before Jeff and Samantha arrived in Europe, we could trap them with limited financial resources while facing prosecution in the United States. International legal cooperation also provided evidence of their sophisticated money laundering operation, supporting federal charges that carried much longer prison sentences than state-level financial crimes. The evidence showed their operation was designed to move stolen assets across international borders specifically to evade law enforcement. Beyond the financial crimes, I worked with medical experts and psychological professionals to document the personal impact of Jeff's betrayal on my health and recovery. This documentation would support restitution claims and demonstrate the full scope of harm his crimes had caused. Medical experts provided analysis showing how Jeff's manipulation of my medication schedule had potentially delayed my recovery and created additional health risks. Psychological evaluations documented the emotional trauma of discovering that my husband had been hoping for my death while I fought for my life. The victim impact documentation also included evidence of how Jeff's lies to friends and family had isolated me during my medical crisis, depriving me of emotional support when I needed it most. This evidence would help prosecutors argue for maximum sentences while supporting my civil claims for damages beyond simple financial restitution. Working with financial recovery specialists, I prepared comprehensive asset tracing that would support both criminal restitution orders and civil asset recovery actions. The documentation showed exactly which assets Jeff had stolen, where they were currently located, and legal mechanisms for recovering them. The asset recovery preparation included analysis of Jeff's domestic assets that could be seized to satisfy restitution orders. His law firm partnership, personal investments, and real estate holdings were all documented as potential sources for victim compensation. Most importantly, the preparation included strategies for recovering assets that Jeff and Samantha hadn't yet transferred to offshore accounts. By acting quickly while they were still planning their escape, we could freeze domestic assets before they disappeared permanently. Through Elvis Gunther, I coordinated with multiple prosecutorial agencies to ensure comprehensive charges that would prevent Jeff and Samantha from escaping justice through jurisdictional complications. Federal prosecutors would handle the money laundering and interstate criminal network charges, while state prosecutors would pursue the domestic fraud and attempted murder charges. The prosecutorial coordination ensured that Jeff and Samantha would face charges in multiple jurisdictions, making it impossible for them to negotiate plea deals that would allow them to escape meaningful punishment. Even if they avoided conviction on some charges, the comprehensive prosecution strategy ensured they would face serious consequences. The coordination also provided opportunities for cooperation agreements with lower-level participants in their criminal network, potentially leading to additional prosecutions and victim identification. Kurt Jensen and other professionals who had assisted their operation could provide testimony in exchange for reduced sentences. The evidence compilation was complete. Jeff and Samantha had no idea that their victim had built an airtight case that would not only expose their crimes but ensure they faced justice in ways their criminal training had never prepared them to handle. Through continued surveillance of Jeff and Samantha's communications, my forensic team discovered that their European departure had been moved up by 3 days due to their panic about my unexpected recovery. They were scheduled to leave for Barcelona in exactly 48 hours, creating a narrow window for intervention before they disappeared permanently. The accelerated timeline actually worked in my favor. Their rushed final preparations were creating additional evidence of their criminal intent, while forcing them to make mistakes that strengthened my case. Jeff's frantic attempts to complete final asset transfers were leaving digital footprints that would be impossible to deny in court. Most importantly, their accelerated escape plan meant they would be vulnerable at the airport with substantial cash and evidence of their crimes. By timing my counterattack to coincide with their departure attempt, I could ensure maximum legal impact while preventing their escape. My legal team identified the airport departure as the perfect moment for law enforcement intervention. Jeff and Samantha would be carrying evidence of their crimes, attempting to leave the country with stolen assets, and unable to destroy documentation once they were in custody. Airport security protocols would provide additional evidence of their criminal intent. Travelers leaving the country with large amounts of cash or valuable assets are required to declare these items, creating official documentation of their possession of stolen funds that would support prosecution arguments. The international nature of their planned departure would also support federal charges and justify the comprehensive law enforcement response my legal team had coordinated. Their attempt to flee the country with stolen assets met the legal definition of money laundering and international flight to avoid prosecution. Working with prosecutors, I helped coordinate a multi-agency response that would ensure Jeff and Samantha faced immediate arrest while preventing any possibility of escape or evidence destruction. Federal agents, state prosecutors, and international law enforcement would all participate in their apprehension. The coordination included freezing all remaining assets that Jeff and Samantha hadn't yet transferred to offshore accounts. By acting simultaneously at multiple financial institutions, law enforcement could prevent any last-minute attempts to move stolen funds before their arrest. Airport security would be alerted to flag Jeff and Samantha as suspected financial criminals attempting to flee prosecution. Their luggage would be searched for evidence, their communications monitored, and their financial transactions tracked in real time to document their criminal activities. Elvis Gunther helped me coordinate with local media to ensure Jeff and Samantha's arrest received appropriate coverage that would deter similar crimes while encouraging other victims to come forward. The media strategy would also protect me from any attempts by Jeff to manipulate public opinion after his arrest. The media coverage would focus on the sophisticated nature of their criminal network and the systematic exploitation of vulnerable individuals during medical crises. This coverage would help law enforcement identify additional victims while deterring other criminals from attempting similar schemes. As the moment of confrontation approached, I prepared myself emotionally for seeing Jeff arrested and facing the end of everything I'd thought our marriage represented. The quiet cryptocurrency analyst who'd built a secret fortune was ready to watch her husband face the consequences of systematically betraying her trust. The preparation included working with psychological counselors to process the trauma of discovering Jeff's complete deception while maintaining the emotional strength needed to testify against him in court. This would be the beginning of justice, not the end of my ordeal. Most importantly, I prepared to transition from victim to survivor, using my experience to help other people avoid similar exploitation while rebuilding my life with the financial security my cryptocurrency portfolio provided. Jeff and Samantha had 48 hours of freedom remaining. They had no idea that their victim had orchestrated a comprehensive response that would ensure they faced justice for every crime they'd committed. Emily Gunther provided my medical clearance to leave the hospital, officially documenting my full recovery from surgery complications that Jeff had hoped would kill me. The medical clearance was strategically timed to coincide with Jeff and Samantha's final preparations, ensuring I would be free to personally witness their arrest. "Your recovery has been remarkable," Dr. Gunther told me as she signed the discharge papers. "From a medical perspective, you've defied every negative prognosis. Your husband will be so relieved to see you fully recovered." The irony in her statement was lost on her, but it crystallized my determination to ensure Jeff faced the consequences of hoping for my death. Courtney helped me prepare for discharge while maintaining the facade that I was still weakened and confused from my ordeal. Jeff's final hospital visits would show him a recovering wife, grateful for his support, with no indication that I'd discovered his crimes or prepared a comprehensive legal response. Working with Elvis Gunther and federal prosecutors, I initiated simultaneous asset freezes across multiple financial institutions to prevent Jeff and Samantha from accessing any remaining stolen funds. The freezes were timed to activate exactly 12 hours before their scheduled flight, ensuring they would discover their financial resources were gone when it was too late to change their plans. The asset freeze included Jeff's law firm accounts, personal banking relationships, and the European accounts where they'd transferred stolen funds. International cooperation agreements allowed European authorities to freeze offshore assets simultaneously, creating a comprehensive financial trap. Most importantly, the freezes included seizure of the cash and valuables Jeff and Samantha planned to carry during their escape. By documenting their possession of these assets at the airport, law enforcement would have immediate evidence of their theft and money laundering activities. My cryptocurrency-funded investigation team established comprehensive surveillance of Jeff and Samantha's final preparations, documenting their activities while ensuring they remained unaware of the impending law enforcement response. The surveillance provided real-time intelligence about their movements and final criminal acts. The surveillance revealed Jeff's increasing desperation as he attempted to complete last-minute asset transfers. His frantic phone calls to European contacts and rushed visits to multiple banks created additional evidence of his criminal intent, while confirming the timeline for law enforcement intervention. Samantha's activities were equally incriminating. Surveillance documented her destroying documents at their shared apartment, purchasing expensive items with stolen funds, and researching permanent residency requirements for countries with limited extradition agreements. Every action strengthened the case against both of them. Through legal wiretaps authorized by federal prosecutors, law enforcement began monitoring Jeff and Samantha's communications in real time. Their conversations provided final confirmation of their criminal intent, while revealing any last-minute changes to their escape plans. The intercepted communications showed their growing panic about my recovery and their rushed timeline. Blanche is asking more questions about our finances. Jeff told Samantha during one monitored call. We need to leave tomorrow night, instead of Thursday. I'm worried she's starting to remember things from before her surgery. Their panic was justified. I was indeed remembering everything, and had documented their entire criminal operation. But their accelerated timeline was actually helping my case by forcing them to make desperate moves that created additional evidence of their crimes. Elvis Gunther coordinated with local media outlets to ensure comprehensive coverage of Jeff and Samantha's arrest, focusing on the broader criminal network they represented, and the sophisticated nature of their fraud scheme. The media strategy would help identify additional victims while deterring similar crimes. The media coordination included providing background information about the systematic exploitation of medical patients and the vulnerability of individuals facing health crises. This coverage would educate the public about these crimes while encouraging other victims to seek help. As I prepared to leave the hospital and witness Jeff's arrest, I made final preparations for the personal confrontation that would end our marriage and begin his prosecution. The quiet cryptocurrency analyst who'd built a secret fortune was ready to face the husband who'd tried to steal everything while hoping for her death. The confrontation would be carefully staged to occur in Jeff's hospital room, where he would expect to find his dying wife, but would instead discover that his victim had orchestrated his complete destruction. It would be the last time he underestimated the woman whose expertise and resources he'd failed to understand. Jeff and Samantha had less than 36 hours before their arrest. The trap was set, the evidence was compiled, and justice was finally within reach for the cryptocurrency analyst they'd tried to silence permanently. Jeff arrived for what he believed would be his last visit to my hospital room before departing for Europe, expecting to find his dying wife sedated and unaware of his final financial maneuvers. Instead, he found me sitting up in bed, alert and coherent, with a small smile that should have warned him everything had changed. "Blanche, you look so much better today," he said, his voice carrying that familiar false warmth I now recognized as calculated manipulation. "In 6 manipulation. The doctors are saying your recovery is exceeding expectations." "I'm so relieved, honey. I am feeling much better, Jeff," I replied, watching his eyes carefully for any sign that he suspected what was coming. "In fact, I've been thinking clearly for the first time in days. Amazing what happens when you reduce pain medication to appropriate levels." I saw a flicker of concern cross his face at my mention of medication levels, but he maintained his performance. "Well, we don't want you to be in pain. I'll talk to the nurses about making sure you're comfortable." "That won't be necessary," I said, enjoying the moment before his world collapsed. "I've been managing my own medical decisions for the past few days, along with making some other important decisions about our future." Jeff's expression shifted as he processed my words, recognizing something different in my tone and demeanor. The confused, grateful wife he'd been manipulating was gone, replaced by someone who was clearly in control of the situation. "What kind of decisions?" he asked, his lawyer's instincts telling him to be careful about what he said next. "Financial decisions, primarily," I said, pulling out a tablet that contained comprehensive documentation of his crimes. "I've been reviewing our accounts, Jeff, all of them, including the ones you thought I didn't know about." The color drained from his face as he realized his carefully constructed deception was crumbling. "Blanche, you're still recovering. You might be confused about—" "I'm not confused about anything," I interrupted, my voice steady and cold. I know about the shell corporations, the unauthorized transfers, the offshore accounts. I know about Samantha and your European escape plan. I know about the life insurance inquiries and your research into medical complications. I know everything, Jeff. I activated the tablet screen, showing Jeff the first page of evidence I'd compiled, a financial timeline tracking every dollar he'd stolen over the past 18 months. His eyes widened as he recognized transactions he thought were untraceable. "This is impossible," he whispered, but his voice lacked conviction. "You've been unconscious recovering from surgery. There's no way you could have discovered that my husband was systematically stealing our life savings while hoping I would die." I finished his sentence. "You're right that it should have been impossible, but you made two crucial mistakes, Jeff." I scrolled to the next screen, showing blockchain analysis of his cryptocurrency transactions. "First, you underestimated my professional expertise. Cryptocurrency analysis is literally what I do for a living. Every digital transaction you made created an immutable record that I could trace." Jeff's breathing became shallow as he realized the scope of evidence I'd compiled. "Blanche, I can explain." "Second," I continued, ignoring his attempted interruption, "you assumed my cryptocurrency portfolio was just a hobby account worth maybe $10,000. It's actually worth $2.8 million, which gave me the resources to hire the best forensic investigators money can buy." I showed Jeff the next screen. Confirmation notices from multiple banks showing that all his accounts had been frozen by federal court order. His face went white as he realized his financial resources had been eliminated. "Your European bank accounts are frozen too," I added casually. "Amazing what international cooperation can accomplish when you provide law enforcement with comprehensive evidence of money laundering and international flight to avoid prosecution." Jeff's lawyer mind was working frantically, trying to find a way out of the trap I'd constructed. "You can't prove intent," he said desperately. "Everything I did was legal emergency financial planning during your medical crisis." I laughed, a sound completely devoid of warmth. "Jeff, I have recordings of you and Samantha discussing how to manipulate my medication schedule to keep me sedated. I have your browser history showing research into how to worsen my surgical complications. I have text messages where you celebrate my cancer diagnosis as a business opportunity." As Jeff processed the magnitude of evidence against him, I revealed the final aspect of my plan. "You and Samantha were scheduled to leave for Barcelona tomorrow night, weren't you? Unfortunately, that's not going to happen." Jeff's confusion was evident. "How could you possibly know our travel plans?" "Because I've been monitoring your communications for the past week," I explained. "Federal wiretaps are wonderful things when you can provide prosecutors with enough evidence to justify them. They've been listening to every conversation you've had with Samantha about your escape plans." The realization that law enforcement was aware of their activities hit Jeff like a physical blow. "This isn't possible." "We were careful. We used encrypted communications. You used poorly secured systems that left digital footprints everywhere," I corrected him. "For a lawyer, you have remarkably little understanding of digital evidence. But then again, you were planning to flee the country rather than face trial, so I suppose legal strategy wasn't your priority." Jeff's desperation was becoming obvious as he realized there was no escape from the trap I'd constructed. "Blanche, we can work this out. I'll return the money. We can go to counseling." "The money is already being returned through asset forfeiture proceedings," I interrupted. "And our marriage ended the moment you started researching how to help me die. There's no working this out, Jeff. There's only justice." I stood up from my hospital bed, stronger and more determined than I'd been since before my cancer diagnosis. "In about 12 hours, you and Samantha will be arrested at the airport on federal charges, including money laundering, fraud, and conspiracy. I wanted you to know that your victim was the one who orchestrated your downfall." Jeff was about to discover that underestimating a cryptocurrency analyst with $2.8 million and a comprehensive understanding of digital forensics was the most expensive mistake of his criminal career. The next evening, I positioned myself in the airport departure lounge with my legal team and federal agents, watching as Jeff and Samantha approached their gate with luggage containing evidence of their crimes and stolen assets. They appeared confident and relaxed, unaware that their financial resources had been frozen and law enforcement was monitoring their every move. Jeff carried a briefcase that surveillance had confirmed contained over $50,000 in cash and cryptocurrency wallet access codes. Samantha wheeled a suitcase packed with jewelry and luxury items purchased with my stolen money. Their casual demeanor revealed how certain they were that their escape plan would succeed. As they approached the security checkpoint, federal agents moved into position. I watched from a nearby observation area as Agent Oscar Hayes stepped forward with arrest warrants, flanked by additional law enforcement officers who would prevent any attempt at escape. Jeff Henderson and Samantha Hayes, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, money laundering, and international flight to avoid prosecution. Agent Hayes announced loudly enough for other passengers to hear and record on their phones. Jeff's reaction was immediate and devastating. His confident demeanor crumbled as he realized the magnitude of the trap I'd constructed around him. "This is impossible," he stammered, looking around desperately for an escape route that didn't exist. Samantha's response was more calculating, immediately attempting to distance herself from Jeff. "I don't know what he's done," she told the agents. "I'm just traveling with him. I'm not involved in any criminal activity." But Agent Hayes was prepared for her denial. "Miss Hayes, we have recorded communications between you and Mr. Henderson discussing the systematic theft of assets from his hospitalized wife, manipulation of her medical care, and your joint plan to flee the country with stolen funds." The arrest was being live-streamed by multiple passengers, creating immediate public documentation of their downfall. Airport security had cordoned off the area, ensuring that their humiliation was complete and public. As federal agents searched their luggage, the scope of evidence became apparent to everyone watching. Jeff's briefcase contained detailed financial records documenting the offshore accounts, communication devices with incriminating messages, and physical evidence of the stolen assets he'd been planning to transport out of the country. Samantha's luggage revealed jewelry appraised at over $200,000, luxury clothing with tags still attached, and documents outlining their European residency plans. Every item had been purchased with stolen funds, creating immediate evidence of money laundering and possession of proceeds from criminal activity. The agents also discovered forged documents that Jeff and Samantha had planned to use for establishing new identities in Europe. The sophistication of their escape plan provided additional evidence of premeditation and conspiracy, supporting the federal charges they would face. News crews arrived within minutes of the arrest, having been alerted by my legal team's coordinated media strategy. The dramatic airport arrest of a prominent attorney and his paralegal accomplice, attempting to flee the country with stolen assets, made for compelling television coverage. Elvis Gunther provided a prepared statement to media outlets. This arrest represents the culmination of a sophisticated investigation into the systematic financial exploitation of a vulnerable individual during a medical crisis. The defendants used their legal training and access to exploit someone who trusted them completely. The media coverage focused on the broader implications of the case, highlighting how medical crises can make individuals vulnerable to financial exploitation by trusted family members and professionals. The coverage would help identify additional victims while deterring similar crimes. As Jeff and Samantha were processed through the federal detention system, my legal team prepared for the arraignment hearing where they would face formal charges. The evidence I'd compiled would support denial of bail based on flight risk and the international scope of their criminal operation. The arraignment would be the first public forum where the full scope of their crimes would be presented to a judge. Federal prosecutors had prepared a comprehensive presentation showing the systematic nature of their theft, the vulnerability of their victim, and the sophisticated escape plan they'd nearly executed. As news of their arrest spread, I prepared my own public statement about the ordeal I'd survived and the justice that was finally being served. The statement would focus on encouraging other victims of financial exploitation to seek help while demonstrating that perpetrators would face serious consequences. While I was fighting for my life in a hospital bed, my statement began. My husband was systematically stealing our life savings and researching how to ensure I didn't survive. But he underestimated the resources and expertise of the woman whose trust he betrayed. The public revelation phase was complete. Jeff and Samantha's crimes had been exposed in the most humiliating way possible, their escape had been prevented, and their prosecution would now proceed through the criminal justice system they had tried to evade. Within 72 hours of their arrest, Jeff and Samantha faced federal arraignment on charges, including conspiracy to commit fraud, money laundering, wire fraud, and attempted international flight to avoid prosecution. The courtroom was packed with media representatives and other victims who had come forward after seeing news coverage of their arrest. Judge Emily Henderson reviewed the comprehensive evidence package my legal team had provided, including the financial timeline, communication intercepts, and documentation of their planned escape. "I have rarely seen such extensive premeditation in a financial fraud case," she stated during the hearing. Federal prosecutors argued successfully for denial of bail, presenting evidence that Jeff and Samantha had demonstrated clear intent to flee the country and had the sophisticated knowledge necessary to evade law enforcement if released. The judge agreed, noting that their arrest at the airport, while attempting to leave for Europe with stolen assets, supported flight risk concerns. Jeff's court-appointed attorney attempted to argue that his actions were legitimate financial management during his wife's medical crisis, but the recorded communications discussing my medication manipulation and hopes for my death undermined any claim of innocent intent. Jeff's arrest triggered immediate professional sanctions from the State Bar Association. His law license was suspended pending investigation, and Henderson and Associates faced scrutiny for their employment of both Jeff and Samantha despite their criminal activities. The law firm's managing partners issued a public statement distancing themselves from Jeff's actions. "We are shocked and horrified by the allegations against Mr. Henderson. His actions represent a complete betrayal of the legal profession's ethical standards and the trust placed in attorneys by their clients and families." Samantha's paralegal certification was revoked, and the State Paralegal Association launched an investigation into how her previous criminal activities had gone undetected when she applied for positions at multiple law firms. Within a week of their arrest, federal asset forfeiture proceedings had recovered over $400,000 of the funds Jeff had stolen from our joint accounts. The international cooperation agreements my legal team had negotiated allowed for rapid freezing and repatriation of assets from European bank accounts. The cryptocurrency transactions Jeff had used for money laundering proved to be his downfall, as blockchain analysis provided an immutable record of every stolen dollar's journey from our joint accounts to his personal wallets. Federal prosecutors called it one of the most complete asset recovery operations they'd ever conducted. Insurance companies that had been processing life insurance claims based on Jeff's false representations of my condition immediately suspended payments and launched their own fraud investigation. The evidence of his systematic deception would likely result in cancellation of all policies and potential criminal charges for insurance fraud. Jeff and Samantha's arrest led to identification of at least 7 additional victims across 4 states who had been targeted by their criminal network. Other women who had been exploited during medical crises came forward with similar stories of financial manipulation by trusted spouses and legal professionals. Kurt Jensen, the financial advisor who had visited my hospital room, was arrested on charges of conspiracy and money laundering. His cooperation with prosecutors revealed the extent of the criminal network and provided evidence against other participants who had helped facilitate financial crimes against vulnerable individuals. The investigation expanded to include real estate professionals, mortgage brokers, and banking officials who had knowingly assisted in fraudulent transactions. The scope of the criminal enterprise was far larger than initially realized, involving dozens of professionals across multiple states. News coverage of Jeff and Samantha's arrest sparked national conversation about financial exploitation of individuals during medical crises. Medical professionals began implementing new protocols for identifying potential financial abuse, while financial institutions enhanced monitoring systems for suspicious transactions during family emergencies. The coverage also led to legislative proposals for stronger penalties for financial crimes committed against individuals during medical emergencies, with several states introducing bills that would classify such exploitation as a specific felony with enhanced sentencing guidelines. As the immediate legal consequences unfolded, I experienced a profound sense of vindication that went beyond simple justice. The quiet cryptocurrency analyst, who Jeff had tried to silence, had not only survived his betrayal but had orchestrated the complete destruction of his criminal enterprise. My cryptocurrency portfolio, which Jeff had dismissed as a worthless hobby, had provided the resources necessary to fund the investigation that brought down an entire criminal network. The skills he'd never bothered to understand had become the tools of his destruction. Friends and family who had been deceived by Jeff's lies about my condition reached out with apologies and support. The revelation that Jeff had been systematically manipulating information about my health while stealing our assets shocked everyone who had known us as a couple. My sister Courtney Hayes, who had flown in after Jeff's dramatic misrepresentation of my condition, became one of my strongest advocates for pursuing maximum legal penalties. "He didn't just steal your money," she told reporters. "He stole 18 months of your life by making you believe you were loved when you were actually being systematically destroyed." The immediate aftermath had exceeded my expectations for justice. Jeff and Samantha faced serious federal charges. Their criminal network was being dismantled, and other victims were finally receiving the justice they deserved. 6 months after their arrest, faced with overwhelming evidence and the possibility of decades in federal prison, Jeff and Samantha's attorneys approached prosecutors about plea agreements. The comprehensive documentation I'd provided had eliminated any possibility of mounting a successful defense at trial. Jeff's attorney requested a meeting with federal prosecutors, hoping to negotiate reduced charges in exchange for cooperation with the broader investigation into their criminal network. However, prosecutors were confident in their case and demanded significant concessions for any plea agreement. "Your client faces a minimum of 25 years on the federal charges alone," prosecutor Elvis Gunther told Jeff's attorney, "plus additional state charges for fraud, attempted murder, and conspiracy. We're only interested in a plea if he provides complete cooperation and accepts responsibility for the full scope of his crimes." Samantha's legal team pursued a different strategy, attempting to portray her as a victim of Jeff's manipulation rather than an equal partner in their criminal enterprise. However, the recovered communications clearly showed her leadership role in planning and executing their schemes across multiple states. When plea negotiations failed to produce acceptable agreements, both Jeff and Samantha proceeded to trial on federal charges. The trial became a media sensation, with extensive coverage of the sophisticated financial crimes and the dramatic circumstances of their arrest. I testified for 3 days, walking the jury through the comprehensive evidence I'd compiled while recovering from surgery that Jeff had hoped would kill me. My testimony was devastating, combining technical analysis of their financial crimes with personal accounts of the betrayal I'd experienced. "The defendant didn't just steal my money," I told the jury during victim impact testimony. "He systematically planned my financial destruction while researching how to ensure I didn't survive to discover his crimes. He used my trust, my illness, and my vulnerability as weapons against me." The jury deliberated for only 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges for both defendants. The foreman later told reporters that the evidence was so overwhelming that deliberation focused primarily on ensuring they'd understood the complex financial transactions correctly. Judge Emily Henderson presided over sentencing hearings that drew victims from across multiple states. The comprehensive scope of Jeff and Samantha's criminal network became fully apparent as witness after witness testified about similar schemes targeting vulnerable individuals during medical crises. Jeff received a sentence of 32 years in federal prison, with additional state sentences to run consecutively. Judge Henderson noted that his abuse of legal training and exploitation of vulnerable individuals warranted maximum penalties under federal sentencing guidelines. Mr. Henderson used his legal education and professional position to systematically exploit individuals during their most vulnerable moments, Judge Henderson stated during sentencing. "His crimes represent a fundamental betrayal of the trust society places in legal professionals." Samantha received 28 years, with the judge noting her leadership role in developing and implementing the criminal schemes. Her attempts to portray herself as a victim were undermined by evidence showing her active recruitment of targets and development of exploitation strategies. The court ordered complete restitution to all identified victims, totaling over $2.3 million across multiple cases. The restitution orders included not only stolen funds, but also damages for emotional trauma, medical expenses, and lost opportunities resulting from their crimes. My restitution order alone exceeded $800,000, including the stolen funds, damages for the delayed medical treatment caused by Jeff's medication manipulation, and compensation for the emotional trauma of discovering that my marriage had been an elaborate financial fraud. The asset forfeiture proceedings had already recovered most of the stolen funds, but the restitution orders ensured that any future assets Jeff or Samantha acquired would be subject to seizure for victim compensation. Jeff's disbarment proceedings concluded with permanent revocation of his law license and prohibition from practicing law in any jurisdiction. The State Bar Association's investigation revealed that he'd been planning financial crimes since law school, using his legal education specifically to develop exploitation strategies. The law firm Henderson and Associates faced civil lawsuits from multiple victims, and eventually dissolved due to reputational damage and financial liability. Other legal professionals who had unknowingly assisted Jeff's schemes implemented new protocols for detecting potential financial abuse. The case resulted in significant changes to financial industry practices, with banks implementing enhanced monitoring systems for transactions involving medical emergencies or vulnerable individuals. Medical institutions developed new protocols for identifying potential financial abuse during patient care. Several states passed legislation creating specific felony charges for financial exploitation during medical crises, with enhanced penalties for professionals who abuse their positions to commit such crimes. The laws became known as Blanche's laws in recognition of my role in exposing the criminal network. Beyond criminal restitution, I pursued civil lawsuits against the financial institutions and professional services that had enabled Jeff's crimes. These settlements provided additional compensation while creating accountability for the systems that had failed to detect obvious fraud. The civil settlements totaled an additional $1.2 million and included agreements for enhanced fraud detection procedures that would protect future victims. The financial institutions agreed to implement new protocols specifically designed to identify exploitation of individuals during medical emergencies. As the legal proceedings concluded, I experienced a profound sense of closure that went beyond simple justice. The quiet cryptocurrency analyst who Jeff had tried to silence had not only survived his betrayal, but had created lasting changes that would protect other vulnerable individuals from similar exploitation. Jeff would spend the remainder of his productive adult life in federal prison, while I had emerged stronger, financially secure, and committed to using my experience to help others avoid similar victimization. The justice phase was complete. Now it was time to focus on the future I would build from the ruins of Jeff's betrayal. 2 years after Jeff's sentencing, I established the Jensen Foundation for Financial Protection, using my recovered assets and cryptocurrency portfolio to create a comprehensive resource for individuals facing financial exploitation during medical crises. The foundation became my life's new mission, transforming my personal trauma into a force for protecting others. The foundation provides emergency financial assistance, legal support, and educational resources for victims of spousal financial abuse, particularly those targeted during vulnerable medical situations. My experience had taught me that traditional victim services often lack the specialized knowledge needed to address sophisticated financial crimes. Working with Courtney Henderson, who had left nursing to become the Foundation's Director of Victim Services, we developed protocols for identifying financial abuse in medical settings. Hospitals across 3 states now use our training programs to help medical staff recognize warning signs of financial exploitation. My cryptocurrency expertise became the foundation for educational programs teaching individuals how to protect their digital and traditional assets from exploitation by trusted family members. The programs focus specifically on creating financial independence that can't be accessed or manipulated by potentially untrustworthy spouses or partners. Financial privacy isn't about hiding money from your spouse, I explained during a recent conference presentation. It's about ensuring that if someone you trust betrays that trust, you have resources to protect yourself and seek justice. The educational programs have reached over 50,000 individuals, with particular focus on women facing medical challenges, who may be vulnerable to the same type of exploitation I experienced. Many participants report feeling empowered to take control of their financial security for the first time. The woman who emerged from Jeff's betrayal was fundamentally different from the trusting wife who had entered that hospital room. I had learned that love without verification was dangerous, that financial independence was essential, and that the quiet analytical skills I'd used in my career could be powerful tools for justice. My cryptocurrency portfolio, which Jeff had dismissed as worthless, had grown to over $4.2 million through careful management and market appreciation. The resources that had funded my investigation and recovery were now funding protection for other vulnerable individuals. Most importantly, I had discovered that survival wasn't enough. Transformation was possible. The trauma of Jeff's betrayal had been real and devastating, but it had also revealed strength and capabilities I never knew I possessed. Jeff and Samantha remain in federal prison, their criminal network dismantled, and their victims compensated. The Blanche's laws passed in multiple states have prevented similar crimes and provided enhanced protection for vulnerable individuals during medical crises. But the most meaningful legacy is the hundreds of individuals who have avoided financial exploitation because of the educational resources and protective protocols developed from my experience. The quiet cryptocurrency analyst, who Jeff tried to silence, had found her voice and used it to protect others from the betrayal she had survived. Where Jeff had planned an ending, I had built a beginning. Where he had sought to destroy, I had learned to create. The trust he had shattered had been rebuilt into wisdom that would protect others for generations to come. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.